A Giants podcast for Giants fans
by Giants fans.
It's Shaun Morash and Paul Dottino.
Down the sideline, into the end zone. Touchdown, Giants!
From the offseason through the wins and the losses, it's time to take one Giant step.
All right, welcome into One Giant Step. The offseason chugs along. I'm your host, Shaun Morash. Remember, you can download and subscribe to the podcast everywhere podcasts are available, including free on the Audacy app. If you missed last week's interview with safety Dane Belton, go back, check that out. He had some interesting things to say about his injury last year and the medical procedures he's had this year. Another guy who hosts, I think, one of the elite podcasts of the Giants, one on my very short queue list, All In with Art Stapleton. As you can imagine, when it's All In with Art Stapleton, the name of that host would be Art Stapleton, who's covered the Giants for a long time. Consider him a friend. Art, welcome on in, man. How are you?
What's up, Shaun? Good to be here. And yeah, it's been a long time, but I do appreciate the plug on the podcast, as I enjoy yours as well. And that was a great interview with Dane Belton last week, and saw him out there shadowing in the back since he's still recovering from that injury he talked to you about. But yeah, it's been an interesting spring for the Giants, to say the least.
For sure. Before we get into Saquon, which is going to be a big topic here on the podcast, and some of the stuff from minicamps and OTAs, just to piggyback, because obviously Dane was on this podcast last week. You've been covering the team. Dane certainly made it sound like a lot of the reasons that maybe his snap count decreased was his inability to deal with the pain from re-injuring the collarbone, and the fact that he's had multiple medical procedures here. The Giants clearly have a hole now with Julian Love gone at safety, who obviously was a fan favorite and a captain. They have a room of a bunch of other guys there, and Belton proclaimed to me that, his intention is to go out there and win that job. Do you think that injury was the main reason Dane Belton lost those snaps last year? Or you think that's a player maybe, trying to look out and find a reason as a rookie why his snap count decreased?
No, I don't. I mean, I agree with what Dane told you. I don't think he was blowing smoke. I do think that there was fear of a reoccurrence of that injury. The idea that it slowed him down to the point where, I think they were almost trying to manage it in a sense to make sure that it didn't refracture, and then he would be gone for the year. I think they mixed and matched on the back end a little bit. Certainly it didn't help that when Xavier McKinney got hurt, and then he was gone for an extended period of time. But I think Belton's right there in the mix. I think it'll be Dane Belton. I think Jason Pinnock is somebody who's been recovering from, some offseason injury stuff that he's right in that mix. When Julian Love left, I had a chance to talk to Julian when he was leaving, and he said, I know they like JP a lot, meaning Jason Pinnock. And I do think Bobby McCain, who they signed from Washington, will also factor in there in that mix with Xavier McKinney. And one thing about Wink Martindale is they like to mix and match on that, on that back end. And I think, there could be times where you see Adoree Jackson and Deonte Banks on the outside, and then a mix of safeties, both in the box and deep. And I think Belton kind of factors in that if McKinney plays in the box, then maybe you have Belton play deep. So, yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, good interview with him last week, and I do think that he's right there in that mix on the back end with really nothing that's been decided yet in the spring.
Yeah, and obviously we just went through OTAs, going through the mini camp before we break, and, it's hold your breath time in the NFL, make sure nobody gets into trouble, nothing stupid happens before training camp, and all of that. Is safety, in your mind, if we could take away the Saquon issue, which we'll get to, the number one concern or question mark entering this training camp or training camp coming up in August for this Giant team?
It's hard to put a label like that on safety because I've seen Wink Martindale essentially without two of his top guys last year, kind of mix and match on the back end and bring guys in. And, a guy like Nick McLeod can play safety, can play corner, can play in the slot in nickel and dime packages. So I think, to me, the biggest thing would be consistency up front offensively. I think the offensive line, we're still, you have Andrew Thomas, and then you have a bunch of questions how you think guys might respond. You're hoping for Evan Neal. You have a rookie that's in the mix to be the starter, and John Michael Schmitz. I think, safety is an interesting one, but I do think that if Deonte Banks doesn't come out of the gates playing well, then corner immediately shoots to the top of the list. Who are you playing behind Adoree Jackson? And then if you have injury issues at corner, that's another thing, especially with the way they open up the season against Dallas. And then, a couple weeks later, they're playing Seattle, who you need to be able to be, out there and man up in the secondary, which is something that Wink Martindale will do regardless of personnel, as we've seen.
Yeah. Now you talked about this a lot on All In, and you've talked about this with us last year. Those couple years with the pandemic, it was odd from reporting from the Giants standpoint, not being in the locker room and everything. So now you get back in the mix last year. So now you're getting into a second go around this year. Your sense is your feet are continuing to be wet about like the attitude in the Giant room. Do you feel like there's confidence exuding after last year? Does this feel like a different, group or a different locker room, second year head coach Brian Daboll, like where the team expects now? They're not just coming into a full rebuild, expects to compete.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk to guys in this locker room, that they feel as though the floor for this season is the divisional round of the playoffs. I mean, I think that's kind of where they see themselves being. Nobody has talked about Super Bowl or trophies or anything like that, which I think the Giants have done a lot of that in the past, and they've kind of run themselves into the ground after that, as we've seen. The failed regimes that have come one after the other have always talked Super Bowl, Super Bowl, Super Bowl. And I think what Daboll did, even from his first press conference as head coach, never really mentioned Super Bowl. You can go back and search for Super Bowl out of his press conference transcript, and he never mentioned Super Bowl. It doesn't mean that that's not the goal, but I think Daboll tried to set the tone at the owners' meetings when he talked about the thing that he can't get over from last season is not all of the success, but how Philly basically kicked them up and down the field in the link in the playoffs. And that's the taste that's in his mouth. And I think he's going to try to make that the team's mantra, if you will. But the spring has really changed a lot, Shaun. And Daboll has taken a certain tact and a certain approach that I think might fit this Giants team. And I don't want to keep rambling on because I know we're going to get into that, but it's part of my impressions of what's going on in OTAs and how they're going to close out this offseason program, and how he's approached it has been very interesting.
So before we get to the elephant in the room that wears the jersey number 26, I do want to just bring up, Art, today, and you were obviously we're taping this on Tuesday, June 13th. You were obviously at Giants minicamp. So what's going on up in Buffalo has been very fascinating. It might be the big national story of the day now that the NBA finals clear out. And that is that Stefan Diggs did not report to Buffalo's mandatory minicamp on Tuesday. Now his agent said that his client is in Buffalo, has been in Buffalo since yesterday morning. He took his physical. He met with head coach Sean McDermott and their general manager the past 2 days, and the Pro Bowl wide receiver, quote, will be there for the entirety of minicamp. That was what the agent said. Yet he doesn't show up today. And Sean McDermott, who I'm surprised he revealed this much, said in a quote that he's very concerned that Diggs is not there. This led to Josh Allen having comments, as Albert Breer reported. I know internally we're working on some things, not football related, but Steph, he's my guy. Excuse me. I bleeping love him. He's a brother of mine. This does not work, what we're doing here without him. So I wonder what working on some things. You hope everything's all right when you hear not football related, but this has been drama all year. Him on social media with his brother talking about same division stuff. I say this as it connects to the Giants because, honestly, anything connected to Buffalo is always going to be connected to this team with Joe Shane, Brian Daboll, the natural connection they would have with Stefan Diggs. And, oh, by the way, I think a lot of Giant fans would say the one unsatisfying part of this offseason might be they got Darren Waller, and he's a pseudo number one receiver, but he's not a wide receiver. Look, if things were to break down here, do you think, because this isn't DeAndre Hopkins, that based on their connection, this might be a change where the Giants would be interested in adding a guy like Diggs into this wide receiver?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of talent and fit in this offense, I mean, we already know what a Stefan Diggs can do in a Brian Daboll offense. We know Joe Shane Obviously has an affinity for Diggs from his time in Buffalo, as you mentioned. And, look, Diggs, you bring him in here and all of a sudden he is your legitimate, wide receiver one. The one thing I will say is if there are things behind the scenes that are not working out up in Buffalo, and if he's not working out those issues with Brandon Beane in Buffalo, I don't know if Joe Schoen would be the guy that all of a sudden would jump in and say, well, I don't care about what your relationship with Beane is. Let me see if I can fix the relationship with me.
True.
They're very close. I mean, it's one of his mentors, Shane's is Beane. So I think it almost works both ways. You look at it, if the Bills were ever to part with Diggs in a window where they need to compete, contend, and try to win a Super Bowl, I'd almost, if Beane is trading away Diggs, would Shane be the guy, online first, or will he have information that would prevent him from, making that kind of deal? That's the only thing that would be in my head, is that sometimes familiarity breeds contempt. And I think in this situation, if the Bills are giving up on Stefan Diggs, why would the Bills South, so to speak, be the first ones in line? That's the only thing that would give me apprehension in terms of Stefan Diggs. Now, if Beane basically looked at it and said, we love Steph, we love having him here, but we have to go in another direction because we're not going to give him a contract, and then that was the only thing, it was the contract sticking point, then I would say, okay, maybe Shane would explore and see what's going on. But you nailed it. For McDermott to come out and say, what he said at the press conference, you almost hope that it's nothing off the field, and not of a football related situation for Diggs. Again, we're taping on Tuesday, so whatever is to come out in the hours and days after the fact. But yeah, I mean, that would be my answer, Shaun, is that
I get it.
Talent wise fit, it makes sense. I just don't know. I think the closer you get to the situation, maybe the further you pull away if he becomes available. And I think that's kind of the situation with Shane and Dable, and then Beane obviously being up in Buffalo and being as close to them as they are.
That is very understandable. And now let's just pivot here to the big story of the Giants week, and probably the story of the summer. It's going to be Saquon Barkley. And we have, another month to go until July 15th. He finally spoke at a camp, and I thought good for Saquon. First of all, the guy has a right to want to make as much money and have as much security for the job he's done, for his family, for himself. He has gone out of his way to say again that he's not looking to reset the market. Now, does that mean he's looking to match Christian McCaffrey? He certainly didn't say he wasn't looking to match Christian McCaffrey at 16.
Right.
No. I'm sure he doesn't like that some stuff has gotten leaked, and I'm sure the Giants have leaked plenty of what's gone on. So I guess, Art, let's start here. Do you think that this is just really heated negotiations that eventually gets done, or do you think we're actually seeing the beginning of a fractured relationship between Saquon and this organization?
I don't think it's a fractured relationship. I think how I look at it, and I was not at Saquon's camp Sunday night, so I'm going off of the videos that I saw, so I didn't have a chance to talk to Saquon face-to-face. But in terms of this, if I were on Saquon's side as his representatives, Team Saquon, if you will, I would probably be frustrated because the Giants haven't really bent in any way, at least perception-wise, right? I mean, Joe Schoen said going into the franchise period, if we franchise tag you, we are going to pull your offer because we are now going to be comfortable using the franchise tag on you.
Right.
And that's what they did. They followed through and they did that. I think, it's a different way the Giants have approached. I mean, look, they went to the 11th hour with Eli Manning all those years back, 2015. Eli, there were reports that came out that Eli wanted to be the highest paid quarterback in the league. And he came out and refuted, actually went after Ian Rappaport at the time, saying that wasn't true. And, and he was in the building, so he wasn't at a camp. He was at the Giants building, but he was frustrated with the way things are playing out. I think what Saquon didn't say is important here. I think we look at it and say, okay, so what do you want? Like, what will get it done for Saquon? And he didn't talk about that on Sunday. He talked around that. I think the Giants know what it'll get it done. and I don't think they've been willing to go there. Do I believe they'll be willing to go there by July 17th? I got to imagine they find some common ground here, Sean. I don't believe that the Giants want to let Saquon go. I don't believe Saquon wants to go anywhere else. And I think that by the end of this thing, $10.1 million guaranteed for this year is probably going to be the high watermark for any running backs that are out there on the free agent market.
Yeah.
So that's the reality.
Yeah, so to add to that, Art, I want to make things clear. I've been very anti-picking Saquon Barkley second overall forever, and I think there's no denying his injury history. It doesn't mean he's not a great player. He's not a great ambassador for the franchise, and it doesn't mean I don't want him here long term. But I think that, like, two things need to both be said out loud here if you're now coming, and it's been a very pro-Saquon push on Monday and Tuesday since he spoke in the national media. I mean, basically Daniel Jones getting dragged at every turn as a result. One thing I didn't like that Saquon said that a lot of other people have said, Saquon talking about, the Patrick Mahomes aspect, and I get it, that's semi-throwing Daniel Jones under the bus, but I think we all are real about it, and that's fine, and even Daniel would agree. But the idea that, look what I've done for this franchise, look what I've done for this team, and so many other people saying that, that's the first mistake of free agency, and one the Giants have made for years. You don't pay a guy for what he's done. You pay a guy for what you think he's about to become, which I think is where it worked out with Daniel Jones. So I think that's a bad negotiating tack for Saquon to be selling what he's done. I want to hear, why are you going to be different than how Ezekiel Elliott fell off a cliff or so many of these other running backs do? That's number one. And number two, whether the Giants pulled whatever offer or not, they realized, what was going on with the market. We've seen what's gone on here with Jacobs, with Eckler, now Dalvin Cook. I mean, the Giants also shouldn't bid against themselves just because they're negotiating with the player. The reality was what the reality is. Whether you think it's fair or unfair to running backs, that's the reality we're living in. So if him and Jacobs want to take a stand, bless their hearts, do that. But the Giants should not be paying him for what he's done, and should also not just be paying him out of the goodness of their hearts. I mean, show me who they're going to compete against or what the competing offer would be if Saquon ever hit the open market. Because right now it tells you that $10 million a year is probably the most he'd probably get.
Well, not for anything, Sean. And again, it all goes back to, everybody's parsing words now. Like, just because you talk about how you don't think that the Giants' offer is unfair to Saquon doesn't mean you're slighting Saquon in any way.
Right.
And the reality is, for what he's been for his career to this point, the Giants have paid him as the number 2 pick in the draft. He's made almost $30 million, I believe, in his career to be here with the Giants.
Right. So, he didn't make $500K each of the last 4 years. Correct.
Exactly. And it's not a situation where Victor Cruz in 2011 was getting paid as an undrafted free agent, and then the following year he wanted a contract, and it was almost like, no, we're paying you what you're worth. No, now you have to pay a guy who led you to the Super Bowl, or at least helped lead you to the Super Bowl. So, look, it's a tough situation. I appreciate where Saquon's coming from in terms of, look, I was here through the bad times, and these are my words, not his, but I was here through the bad times. I was the one you trotted out there. I was the face of the franchise. I'm shaking hands and kissing babies when I have to. I represent this organization. What I think, and my personal feeling on this, is that Saquon's appealing to John Mara and Steve Tisch. And that's the way I see it. He's appealing to the organization, to ownership that has, I don't want to say given in, but certainly catered and put a premium on guys who were the face of the franchise, important Giants, and that's how they were paid. And not for anything, they had gotten in trouble at times by doing that. And they did that at the latter part of Eli's career here with the Giants. And it led to ultimately, an ugly situation, and we're not going to go rehash that. But the reality is, you have a general manager here who is not just trying to set things up for 2023. He's looking ahead. He's trying to think where this franchise is going to be 3-4 years from now. And I don't know if Saquon Barkley is going to be a part of that. We've seen running backs in this league. We've seen any player at any position other than quarterback really get to a point in their career where they're 1-year deals. They're basically going from 1-year deal to the next because their bodies have given out or the league has dictated that they hit a certain point, and that's just the way it is. And for Saquon, to me, it's a tough call because the Giants want to win this year. They have a
Right.
locker room that knows that Saquon is a huge part of this team. So Joe Shane has got to basically look at the locker room and decide how far is he willing to go beyond his value of Saquon and the number that they put on the player versus the impact in the locker room. And I'll tell you this, we started the whole interview with Julian Love. Now, Julian Love got an offer from the Giants early in free agency. It was coming off of the end of the season. He had an offer, and Joe Shane basically said, when the new league year starts, that offer is off the table and you're invited to explore the market. Now, I don't know if it was done in those terms, but that's what I heard. And I heard that directly from Julian Love, that the Giants took their offer off the table. They were told they were going to do that. When Julian Love got his offer from Seattle, he came back, called the Giants, said, will you match Seattle? And it was the same day that the Giants signed Darius Slayton. And Joe Shane said to Julian, we have to wish you well. We already moved on with certain plans. We wish we would have talked to you sooner, but this is the way it was. And Julian Love had to live with the idea that he gave up money to basically end up in Seattle. And that's the business that Joe Shane is trying to build here with the Giants, is that they're trying to be honest. You can't make a threat in bargaining and negotiating and then back off of it.
Yeah.
And I think they didn't do that with Love, and they lost a captain, a guy who was beloved in the locker room and the organization. The media loved him, fans loved him, and they lost a player because they held strong on what they were deciding. And I think ultimately they'll probably give a little bit more for Saquon, but I don't know how much more. I do think he'll be here this year. I do think they'll probably come to an agreement at some point. But I think it's probably Saquon who's going to have to give more than the Giants will.
I can't even follow that up. That is so perfectly said. I guess if I were to follow it up, now that I'm thinking about it, just one more thing, Art. Saquon did talk about in that quote about Patrick Mahomes about like not every team has that and the running backs are different. And you talked about Joe Shane thinking about this team a couple of years down the road. And I think that's the money part of it. Yes, the Giants made the playoffs last year, partially because Saquon Barkley was an absolute stud horse. If the Giants forget 2023 for a second, or in 2024 and 2025, and that is their main recipe for making the playoffs, I would argue that the team is not closer to being a Super Bowl contender. They need to start building the team in those ways, and that's the dream, not just winning 9 games and going to beat Minnesota in the wild card round. And that's why you pay guys and try to think about down the line about how your team wants to be structured. And by the way, don't pay Daniel Jones $40 million if you think he just needs that absolute stud running back to carry him home either way. And I think that the ownership showed you that they have faith in him and probably the coaching staff that they continue to change that. Fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think they're looking ahead. I mean, look, they're already looking at next year. Joe Shane let it slip. I believe it was at the Combine, that about the franchise tag when it was with respect to Daniel Jones before he signed his contract. And Shane said, well, then you got to look towards next year. And if we need the franchise tag for Xavier McKinney, if he raises his game to where we think it could get to, the safety number on the franchise tag is a lot lower than other positions. So
Sure.
You use that franchise tag as a negotiating tool. You've got Andrew Thomas coming up, who is going to reset the market at offensive tackle. I don't think there's any way to
As he
ignore
should.
that.
Yeah.
He absolutely should, and I think he will, and I think the Giants will reset the market.
And
Just
that's a position, by the way, Giant fans are not willing to play around with, as you know.
Right.
after all these years.
Now, here's the factor, Sean, and I said this to somebody at practice today. If you had to line up the most important Giant, I do it every year, who are the most important Giants to success in 2023, who are their most dominant players, whatever you want to say. Right now, the 2 most important players on the Giants are Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah.
Daniel Jones is extremely important. Don't get me wrong. He's paid as much for his importance and who he is, as much as it is the quarterback market. They wouldn't have just pulled $40 million a year out of the air and said, we got to pay Daniel Jones this. So where does Saquon fall in that? probably
Yeah.
very close.
Yeah,
But
I'd put Adoree Jackson before Saquon too at this point, to be honest with you.
just in terms of you need Adoree Jackson out on the field, absolutely.
Yes,
I mean, I don't think they're going to extend him at this point.
No,
but
I mean in 2023,
for
I
this
think
year,
you could,
yes,
right. You could find a way to compete all year with Saquon. I don't think you can find a year to compete with strictly Deontay Banks in a
absolutely.
corner.
I mean, once Aaron Donald is out of the picture, okay, you can make an argument that the Giants have the best left tackle in football and the best defensive tackle in football.
Yeah,
and they will be paid accordingly. Those positions are premium positions, and the market in the NFL are telling you that you may have a premier player at running back, but running back is not a premier position. So are you willing to go beyond the market and say, we love Saquon, we need him here, and we're going to reward him for all these things that he's going to do beyond the football field? In the past, I think the Giants might do that. But the Giants were also refusing to match Justin Tuck and sent Justin Tuck to Oakland when Justin Tuck wanted a little bit of respect after winning 2 Super Bowls and say, keep me here. I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to be here. And they made the decision, the hard decision, we can't meet your price. And they let him go. Saquon hasn't done for this organization yet what Justin Tuck did for this
there ain't no doubt about that.
OCU Manura once had a knockdown, drag out fight with the Giants general manager and Jerry Reese. If you remember that, Sean, OCU Manura accused Jerry Reese of lying in legal documents. And then when OC went to Atlanta and things didn't work out well, he ended up coming back, retired as a Giant. And on the day he retired, he and Jerry Reese laughed about it. They laughed about it. They said, we went to the diner. Remember, we talked it out, all that stuff. So ultimately, I think that's probably where this Saquon thing ends up going. I know we've rambled and gone all over the place, but look, there's still a lot of uncertainty. I think there are 2 extremes to this, Sean. One, Saquon sits out the season. It's not going to happen.
No way.
It's not going to happen. For a guy who has missed as much time as he has, and how it's just ached at his core to have to miss that time, there's no way he's sitting out the season. Could I be wrong? Sure. The other side, the other extreme, is that the Giants decide in late August, Eric Gray looks great in practice, and we're tired of this thing dragging on, and we're rescinding the tag on Saquon, and he's now a free agent. We get nothing for Saquon, but what are we going to do? We're not going to tie up $10 million. We'll send it to next year, and maybe we get the maybe at that point Dalvin Cook is still on the market, and you sign Dalvin Cook for 1 year, $7 million. And
you save $3 million.
It's not. I mean, they're not going to rescind the tag. Joe Shane has said all along, you want Saquon Barkley here. They want him to be a part of this team for 2023 and beyond. And now it's just a waiting game, and it's frustrating. And you're going to read things, and you're going to hear things, and you're going to say, when is this thing going to end? I think it'll end right around that deadline on July 17th, and I think they'll ultimately get a long-term deal done. It'll probably be a little bit closer to what Saquon wants, a lot closer to what the Giants want, and that's just the reality of the situation, the way I see it.
That is Art Stapleton. Art, where can we find all of your work, your podcast, reading you? Tell the audience.
Podcast is All In with Art Stapleton. You can find it on all your favorite podcasts. I'm sure everywhere One Giant Step is, I'm sure you could find All In with Art Stapleton. One-on-one interview this week with Darren Waller. I think you'll really enjoy it. That happened after practice on Tuesday, so that'll be up by the time you hear the show. So make sure you check that out. We'll have video and audio clips, and all my coverage you can check out on northjersey.com. Subscribe if you can. We like to think that we have the most complete Giants coverage out there, so hopefully you'll enjoy that as well. And we'll keep getting Sean back on All In at one point to be able to do a nice little crossover with One Giant Step.
I love it, Art. I love it. Art Stapleton, our friend. Thanks, Art, for taking One Giant Step with us. And thank you to the audience. As always, download, subscribe. As Art said, everywhere podcasts are available. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching this video. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest updates. Links are all in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. One giant step.